the reason I chose this is because I feel like it has been pretty prevalent around me, at least in the last 6 months or so. When I'm a small human, I can barely see over this thing right here, and our worship team, who is amazing, is also very small right now. But I was telling them when we went back to pray earlier that yes, we're a smaller worship team than we've been used to, but I think in being small like that, it has given us like the courage to step out and do things that we typically wouldn't do, making us even more mighty. So I wanted to talk about the story of David and Goliath, but first I wanted to give like a little bit of a backstory on David before Goliath came along. So David, in 1 Samuel 16:7, the Lord sent his prophet Samuel to David's father's house, Jesse, and was looking for the next king of Israel. So the Lord told Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at his height or his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees. For a man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at our heart." So at this time, when Samuel goes to David's father's house, David was probably estimated to be around 10 to 15 years old. And while he's there, Jesse had 8 sons. David was the youngest, and David was the one to tend to their family's sheep. So Samuel's at Jesse's house, and Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. So Samuel looks at Jesse and says, "The Lord has not chosen any of these sons of yours," and asks him, "Are there any more children?" And Jesse responds, "Yes, my youngest son David, he's out tending to the sheep." So Samuel tells him to go send for David and bring him back. So he sent out for David, brought him back in, and then when David comes in, the Lord tells Samuel, he says, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." And when he tells Samuel that, he's meaning that David is the next king of Israel. So just at 10 to 15 years of age, he's already anointed as the next king of Israel. So I wanted to give you that little bit of backstory, because that is before the Israelites and King Saul went to war with the Palestinians. So the Israelites go to war, and they're in a valley. So on one end of the valley is the Israelites and King Saul, and then on the other end is the Palestine army. So throughout this time, there's what they called a great champion, Goliath. He was said to be 6 cubits and a span tall, so that and feet is about 9 foot 9 inches. So this Goliath was pretty close to 10 feet tall. So each day for 40 days, Goliath comes to the front of the Palestinians' battle line, and he's taunting the Israelites. He's telling them, "Send one of your soldiers to fight me. If your soldier can kill me, then the Palestine people and army will serve the Israelites." And then vice versa. If he were to kill one of the Israelite soldiers, then they would serve the Palestinian army. So I want to start in 1 Samuel chapter 17. So David's 3 oldest brothers out of his 7 other siblings were with King Saul and the Israelites at war with the Palestine army. And Jesse, David's father, would send him each day with food and refreshments to take to his brothers to check on them to see how things were going with the war. So one morning, Jesse sends David to the battleground to check on his brother. So David overhears Goliath taunting and mocking the Israelite soldiers and asks if the other soldiers hear what he's saying. So Saul and the Israelites, they see Goliath keep coming out, and this big 10-foot tall guy, that's like 2 of me almost. I'm 5'2". And do you guys know that like there's a meme that's like 5'2", but my attitude's 6'4"? Yeah. I like to think of myself as that sometimes. Like I'm really small, but I think like, and it's strange, but sometimes I will think of myself like if I were to ever be in a situation where like a group of people tried to jump me, like I feel like I'm small, but I also have a heart to where, like, one, I have God on my side. So having faith in my God and also having the heart that I have, I always picture myself in that situation coming out of it untouched. Yes. Amen. So I can kind of relate to David. So at this time when he is going out and taking food to his brothers, he was between like 16 and 20 years old, so still a pretty young guy, going out to his older brothers, while like the Palestinian army, like their soldiers were trained from youth. So David overhears Goliath mocking the soldiers, telling them to send one of their guys out to fight him. And David is like, do you guys hear him? Like, nobody's going to go fight this guy? Okay, well, I'll do it. So David decides to go, or Saul overhears David actually, and then calls for David. So David goes to Saul, and Saul tells him, like, you're nothing but a young boy. Like, you don't stand a chance. And then David proceeds to tell Saul, so David says in 1 Samuel 17:34, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, I struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. So Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So in preparation for this, David goes down to a stream. Actually, I'm going to back up a little bit. So Saul tries to put his armor on David, and David is like, yeah, I'm not used to this. I can't wear it. Take it off me. So he grabs his staff, goes down to a stream, picks up 5 smooth stones, puts these stones in his pocket along with he had a slingshot. So he is preparing to face this 10-foot tall man who they refer to as a great champion. And he's going to face him with a slingshot and some stones. But David knew that he had the power of God on his side. So no matter how small he was, no matter how young he was, even when the king of Israel told him that he was just a young man, he knew that as long as he had faith in his God and trusted his God, that he was going to overcome Goliath. So David goes to the front of the Israelites' battle line, and Goliath sees him and then starts to mock David. So he says to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" So then David responds to him. David's kind of a cocky guy, the way he talks to Goliath in this. So he says to Goliath, he says, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." He says, "You come against me with your sword and your spear and your javelin." So I want to touch base on Goliath's javelin. So they say that his javelin was like a weaver's rod. So he's got this giant javelin, and the spear tip of it was made of iron, weighed about 600 shekels. So in our measurement system, that would be like 16 pounds for a spear. So I was reading this, and then I was like thinking to myself, I was like, that'd be like throwing one of my cats at somebody. I have some pretty big cats, and they're heavy for a cat. So I'm imagining like the spearhead as heavy as one of my cats. So David says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. This is the day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of this Philistine army to the birds and to the wild animals, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel." He then goes to say that all those gathered will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. So earlier I said that David was very cocky in the way that he spoke to Goliath, but he knew God. He was faithful to God. He knew that God prepared him for this moment and for more, just in him tending to the sheep and killing the lion and the bear and whatever other animal or anything that could have harmed David that was put in his path. God gave him the strength to be able to overcome those things. And he knew it was the same in this case. He didn't care that Goliath was almost 10 foot tall. He knew that God was with him, and that in the end, God would be the one to help him overcome Goliath. So then David sees that Goliath is starting to move closer to attack him. So then David runs to meet Goliath. I don't know about you guys, but if I saw somebody 10 foot tall coming at me, I'm not running towards them. I'm running away. Even if I think that I'm 6'4" sometimes. I'm 6'4" and 10 foot. That's still a huge difference. So David reaches into his bag and takes out one of the stones that he had retrieved from the stream earlier. He slung it and struck Goliath in the forehead. The stone sunk into his forehead and he fell down to the ground. Like fell on his face to the ground. So just that one little stone took out a giant. Something so small took out something that we would look at as big and mighty and strong. So after David kills him with the stone, he proceeds to then cut his head off like he told him he would do. After he does this, Saul hears about it and then asks for David to be brought to him. So then David goes to Saul, and it says in 1 Samuel 17 that when he went to Saul, he still was carrying Goliath's head in his hand. So not only did David take out a giant with a small, smooth stone and a slingshot, he proceeded to carry around his head as proof of like what God can do for us and how he can help us to like overcome our enemy or whatever our giant or Goliath is. For me, one of my giants that I continuously try to face is being in front of people in this like vulnerable setting. So whether that's singing a song on Sunday or Wednesday or Good Friday, or standing up here and speaking to you guys and hoping that I can give you guys hope and that God can speak through me to give you the courage and confidence and strength that you need to overcome and face whatever it is that you're facing. Amen. So even after David had killed Goliath, so when I first started, I said that he was anointed by the prophet Samuel to become the next king of Israel. So some of David's accomplishments after he had killed Goliath were when he became king of Israel when he was about 30 years old and ruled over Israel for 40 years. I've also noticed that the number 40 is like all throughout like scripture. Yeah. So even with like Goliath coming and taunting the Israelites, he for 40 days every morning and evening would come to the front of the battle line to taunt them and challenge them. King David ruled over Israel for 40 years. And there are many other stories throughout scripture that mention 40 days, 40 nights, the story of Noah. They were in the wilderness for 40 years. So some of his accomplishments that he had, one, he was known as a poet, a musician, a soldier. I'm not sure how many, but I know he wrote some of the Psalms. So when David became king of Israel, it was split. So there was like northern Israel and southern Israel. And Israel had 12 tribes. Before David became king, these 12 tribes of Israel were what we would refer to as like self-governed today. So when he became king in 2 Samuel 5, verse 1 through 5, it says, "Then all the tribes of Israel went to David at Hebron and told him, 'We are your flesh and blood. In the past, when Saul was our king, you were the one who really led the forces of Israel. And the Lord told you, you will be the shepherd of my people Israel. You will be Israel's leader.' So there at Hebron, King David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders of Israel, and they anointed him king of all of Israel." So not only did he united all of Israel, north and south, but the 12 tribes of Israel also. He conquered Jerusalem and then made Jerusalem the capital of Israel. He brought the ark of the Lord into Jerusalem, set up a dynasty throughout Israel. So he basically started to build an empire. Okay, doing good on time. So another thing that I noticed in this story is, like, not only was David, he was small and was able to face and conquer his giant, but it proves to us how something I always hear is the Lord doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And that's something that is proven again in this story about David and Goliath. Even in him being anointed as the next king of Israel, he was 10 to 15 years old tending sheep in the field, and God said to Samuel, this is him, this is the next king of my people. So he equipped him with the strength, the courage, and the confidence to be able to face Goliath and then do the next things that he needed to do in order to get to where God intended for him to be. I also wanted to mention a little bit about Moses when God sends him to Egypt. Moses was terrified to go to Egypt. He told God, like, I can't talk. Like, what if they don't believe me? What do I do? And he tells the God, like, I can't speak. I'm not eloquent. I'm slow with words. Some people say that he had a stutter. So God wanted him to go and speak to his people and bring them out of Egypt. God didn't care that Moses had a stutter. He used him anyway. He gave him everything that he needed. He gave him his rod to be able to perform signs in case the people didn't believe him. And then he also called Moses' brother Aaron to help him. So I wanted to read a couple of scriptures that one means a lot to me, and it's my life verse, and it helps me in believing that yes, I may be small, but because I have God, I can also be mighty. So Isaiah 41 verse 10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So I find it funny that my life verse, being someone who has constantly, until probably the last year, has let fear hold them back from so many things, that my life verse starts with, "So do not fear." And that's been my life verse since I was like 8 or 9 years old. So God does funny things like that sometimes. The next verse is James 1, verses 2 through 4. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete and need nothing." And that right there, it reminds me that even if I don't think that I'm big enough or smart enough or strong enough to do what I feel God is calling me to do, He's given me everything that I need to do it. It's his plan for me. So he's not gonna have a plan for me and not give me what I need to walk through that. So that's all I have. So I'll call the worship team back up.